When we see acts of terrorism, it's so easy to just label the people behind them as monsters, driven by some kind of pure evil. But what if there's more to it? What if the path to violence isn't random at all, but more like a predictable psychological process? Okay, let's dive into this. So, what makes a terrorist? Are they born evil or are they made? That's really the core question we're tackling in this explainer. We're going to use psychosocial research, which basically looks at how our individual psychology and social world interact, to deconstruct that journey, to see how a person can go from being in crisis to committing extreme violence. Okay, first things first. Before we can really get into the mind of a terrorist, we have to be super clear about our terms. Because in psychology, aggression isn't just one simple thing, and the distinction here is absolutely critical for understanding everything else. So, on the one hand, you've got aggressiveness. Think of this as a gut reaction, that adaptive defensive instinct. It's when you react to a threat without a lot of forethought. But violence, as it's defined here, is a whole different ballgame. This isn't a reaction, it's a choice. It's a learned behavior, a calculated strategy picked to get something done. And this is so important to understand. The kind of terrorist violence we're talking about here isn't presented as just some random outburst of rage. It's a tool, a terrifyingly calculated tool used to achieve a goal. So the real question is, what on earth could bring someone to the point where they choose such a horrifying strategy? Well, according to the research, the path to this kind of violence often doesn't start with hate or politics. It starts with something much more personal, a deep, profound crisis that leaves a person completely vulnerable. So how does this actually happen? Well, it's almost like a psychological breakdown in 4 stages. It kicks off with feeling totally isolated and marginalized, which leads to chronic stress. That stress then physically and mentally weakens you, making you incredibly suggestible. And then comes the scariest part. Your whole sense of who you are just collapses. You feel lost, out of control, and honestly desperate for anything or anyone to offer a way out. Okay, so you've got this person who is incredibly vulnerable, just emotionally shattered. This is the moment ideology can step in. It shows up and offers exactly what they're craving: answers, a purpose, and, critically, someone to blame for all their pain. Think of ideology as a brand new operating system for a person's brain. It's not just giving them ideas, it's completely rewriting how they see the world. It hands them a set of beliefs that makes violence seem justified, it paints the enemy as less than human, and creates this intense us versus them world. Suddenly, in this new black and white reality, violence doesn't just seem okay, it feels like the only logical thing to do. And this diagram from the source material really shows you what that looks like. You see the personal problems, right? The things that made them vulnerable in the first place? Ideology acts like a filter, like a lens. It takes all that personal pain and channels it, focuses it, until violent action seems like the only logical conclusion. Yeah, this quote just nails it. A moral filter. It gets rid of all the complexity, all the gray areas. Your world is now split into 2 camps, us and them, good and evil. And when you see things that way, violence against them can start to feel like a righteous act. So this all brings us back to that big question from the start. You might be thinking, okay, this whole process, it just sounds like it creates a psychopath. But is that actually what's happening? Let's look at what the research says when we compare the two. Okay, look at this table. The differences are night and day. A psychopath is driven by their own ego, their own personal gain. They're impulsive. But a terrorist, their motivation is ideological, something they believe is bigger than themselves. And here's a key thing. They can often feel deep loyalty to their own group. Their violence isn't random. It's strategic. It's planned out. So yeah, the research is pretty overwhelming on this. The idea of the psychopathic terrorist is mostly a myth. And why does that matter so much? Because it means we're often not dealing with a bunch of isolated individuals who can't feel empathy. We're dealing with people who are part of a highly committed group, all acting on a belief system they share. That completely changes how we have to think about this. All right, so we've gone through this whole psychological journey. What's the main takeaway here? What are we left with? Here's the bottom line. The sources we're looking at here don't frame terrorism as just, pure random evil. They present it as a pathology that has a history. It's the final step in a tragic but frighteningly predictable process: a personal crisis, a psychological collapse, and then being captured by a powerful ideology. And that leaves us with a really challenging final thought. Now, let's be crystal clear. Understanding this path doesn't excuse the horrific violence for 1 second, but it does change where we look for solutions. If this road to radicalization has predictable signs along the way, it forces us to ask a really critical question. What does that mean for preventing people from even setting foot on that path to begin with?